All right, so good to see everybody and good to be back. We are continuing with our study of Kabbalat Shabbat. If any of you have ever, by the way, it's a good moment to point this out. If you feel as though you have ever missed out on one of our classes, then no worries, because you can always catch it on YouTube afterwards. It's already streaming on there. But if you weren't with us last week, that's okay. You're joining at a good time, because we had just started the first few psukim of Lechu Neranena, which is Psalm 95, Tehillim Tzadi Hey, and this is a first in a series of 5 in a row that are found at the beginning of Kabbalat Shabbat. One of the things we talked about last week was that Kabbalat Shabbat was started in Tzvat, no doubt, in the late 16th century. And the intention of it was really to hearken back to some of the rabbis in the Gemara in terms of how they wanted to bring in Shabbat. They wanted to bring in Shabbat in a way that it was like greeting the Shabbat clean, and going outside. That was the practice of Rabbi Hanina, and I believe the other one was Rabbi Yanai. I think it was Rabbi Yanai. They would go out and they would actually do some sort of greeting ritual moment out in the fields. So we wanted to try to understand, why is it that these chapters in Tehillim are the right type of selection to set the mood for that moment when in Lecha Dodi, when it's Boi Kala, we all turn to the back of the room and welcome in the Shabbos that may not be out in the fields. But what is going on in terms of the mindset, setting the mindset by choosing these paragraphs of Tehillim? Now, what we've been doing is looking at it from two perspectives. One perspective is that of the Radak. So far, we looked at the first few psukim, which I'll review in a second. And the Radak takes a very, full disclosure, the Radak predates the 16th century. Okay, Rav David Kimachi wrote a commentary on all of Tanakh. I believe all of Tanakh. I haven't gone through all of Tanakh to know that, but every book I've ever studied, he's there. He wrote something, and he takes a very messianic approach to Lechu Neranena and to the chapters that will follow. That this idea of calling out Lechu Neranena Hashem, singing out to God, is at a time when Mashiach is coming, and that when David HaMelech, or whoever, David HaMelech, or those who helped author it with him, wrote this, they had sort of a messianic image in mind. Whether that was actually the intent of David HaMelech may not be relevant to why it was chosen for Kabbalat Shabbat, but nonetheless, it is interesting to see the Radak's perspective. There's one perspective which very much fits with why it would have been picked. It has a messianic feel to it. Well, actually, Aruch HaShulchan, I was preparing for my Thursday morning class, and which is now about Hilchot Shabbat, and the Aruch HaShulchan mentions that Shabbat is me'ein olam haba. It's sort of this next world. It's a little bit of it's the Yom Shekulo. It's reflective of the Yom Shekulo Shabbat, a day when it will be always Shabbat, which is reference to the times of Mashiach. So to see this paragraph as a reference to Mashiach is not incongruous with why it would have been selected. It makes a lot of sense. Another approach that we took last week and that we'll take today is also thinking about what Amos Chacham, who is the commentator in the Mossad Harav Kook version of their edition of Tanakh, and in particular, he does Sefer Tehillim. He's the author of the commentary. There are different scholars who authored different books of Tanakh through Mossad Harav Kook, through this edition of Dat Mikra. And so he takes the approach that this Mizmor, this chapter of Tehillim of Lechu Neranena, would have been something that was sung by the Ole Regalim. That maybe David HaMelech had in mind that when people were going to come to the Beit HaMikdash, even though it wasn't built yet, his son would build the Beit HaMikdash. So when those who were in other parts of Israel, not Yerushalayim, and even beyond Israel, I guess, those who would be coming for the Shalosh Regalim of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot would want to be able to sing out in joy as they are coming towards the Mikdash, as they're coming towards the temple. And that's, he takes that sort of approach where this is not referring to Mashiach, but is referring to the encounter with God at the temple. So let's just review very quickly those few psukim. I'm going to share my screen now that we did a little bit of background and intro. Okay, here we go. All right. And okay, so just, by the way, it's the same source she as last week. We're just continuing working off of that. So we saw, just review the psukim to help us jump into where we are today. So you see source number 5, which is the first pasuk of the paragraph. Lechu Neranena Hashem Nariya L'tzur Yishenu. Right? Come, let us sing joyously. Let us sing to God. Nariya, let us shout out. Let's, Nariya, same word, at least many see here as the word teruah, so that like calling out sound to our rock and our Yishenu, is our salvation. And the chapter continues. Nikadma fanav betodah. We're over down here now. Nikadma fanav betodah. Let us come before Him, before God, in thanks. And this is where the dat mikra of Amos Chacham, this edition over here that I have on my desk in front of me, says, you see here, they're bringing some sort of thanksgiving offering. They're bringing something which would often be brought along with their travels to Jerusalem for the 3 festivals. They would bring their own personal korbanot of thanks to God for whatever happened maybe in their lives recently. And bizmirot narielo, let us, in song, shout out and call out to Him. So we have this joyous, jubilant scene here. Again, Radak takes a messianic approach, and Amos Chacham takes this approach that we're talking about coming to the Beit HaMikdash and the excitement of arriving to the Beit HaMikdash to come before Nikadma fanav betodah, before God, before His face. The next pasuk, which I think was the last one that we saw, was Ki kel gadol Hashem umelach gadol al kol Elohim. Why should we sing to God? Because God is great. Ki kel gadol Hashem. He's a great God. Umelach gadol al kol Elohim. And He is a great king over all the other lowercase g gods who are not real and they're not really divine. Right? So because God, and this again, if you're taking a more messianic approach as the Radak did, well, so what does that mean? So all the other gods can't do what God is doing, and they basically they work for Him, or they pale in comparison in the sense that they can't accomplish that which, of course, God can. They can't accomplish anything. But visually now, everyone is seeing with the ushering in of the messianic period, everyone is presumably seeing how great God is at that moment as a king over the world. So that's where we were. And that really is the first part of there are really 2 parts to this chapter in Tehillim. And the first part here has a very positive, upbeat, joyous tone. And this really, what we've seen here, that is I would call it the first part of the Chelek Aleph, first part of the first half of this Mizmor, in that it is summarized by saying, let us sing out to God. That's how I would summarize this. And now we're going to see that this is still praising God, but we are now the chapter is going to describe how much control, how vast are the powers of God in this world. which also relates to why we would be singing out to him. Why, what makes him a Kel Gadol, this great God? Okay, so here we are. We're up to source number 11, and now we'll take it a little bit slower. That was all a review. So hopefully that for those who either tuned in last week live or watched afterwards, hopefully that was somewhat of a review and hopefully gets us going to where we need to be today. We're up to speed. Okay, and by the way, feel free at any point. I see we have a number of people here today with us, 15 participants, which is incredible, wonderful. I'm so excited. Just feel free to any point chime in with your ideas and your thoughts. That's what makes the learning experience, I think, for me and for everybody, it brings it up to a different level when people bring in their own ideas. I know what I think because I prepared this. I'd rather be able to hear some other ideas as well. Okay. The next pasuk, the fourth pasuk in the chapter, says, "Asher biyado mechkerei aretz v'toafot harim lo." That in God's hands, in His hands, are the mechkerei aretz. It's like the mechkerei aretz means like the depths of the earth. That's in God's hands. And what will be the opposite of that? V'toafot harim lo. And the top of the mountains, the peaks of the mountains are also His, which is another way of saying the world is God's. God controls this world. Okay? And the Radak here writes, David Kimchi writes here, Ukmoshe gavoim hashamayim v'haaretz biyado v'hu melech aleihem kein biyado tachtiyot haaretz. Just like God controls the heavens and the earth are in His hands, and He's king over them, so too, even the lowest of the low, you can dig into the earth. God's divine control and His divine presence is over that part of the world too, the depths of the earth. He says here, Amar bahem lashon mechkar al derech vayachru mosdei aretz lamata. It's like you can think about like digging down into the earth. Right? That's God. God controls that, and He also controls toafot harim lo zecher tachtiot haaretz v'zecher gavei haaretz v'heim harim hagvohim. How would you represent God as sort of the top of the world, the physical world that we're in here? The highest mountains, the tippy top of the highest mountain. Zehu toafot harim lo. That's what toafot harim lo refers to. Okay, so that speaks to God's the praise, the first part of God's powers and praise and how He fills this world. Like the paragraph continues of Tehillim, Asher lo hayam v'hu asahu. Where else is God? Where else is God? He is in the sea, right? And He made it. V'hu asahu. V'yabeshet yadav yatzaru. And the dry land, yabasha, v'yabeshet, which, as Amos Chacham points out, is often, it's a lashon hapiyut. The way it's phrased, instead of v'yabasha, v'yabeshet is a very much the kind of grammatical form of a poem that that you'll find in poetry, in biblical poetry. V'yabeshet yadav yatzaru. The dry land, God fashioned it. He formed it. He made that. So again, it's a continuation of God's vast control over the world. Now, let's read the Radak, and I want to stop and think about Kabbalat Shabbat again for a moment in that vein. What happens here? Zecher haaretz bichlal. We mentioned before, the Radak points out, in the previous verse, we mentioned land in a more general sense. God controls the land, right? Melech, He's Melech. He controls the land. Mechkerei aretz v'toafot harim lo. And now we're talking about a specific example. V'ata zecher beprat hayam v'yabasha. More specifically, now we're talking about the sea, all the vast bodies of water in this world, and the dry land that is in this world. Ki hakol lo, everything belongs to God. Kolomar biyado uvirushuto. It's in His hand, meaning it's in His possession. It's God's. We should always think of the things that are in this world as not ours, but they are God's. right? I think I mentioned this in other contexts before in teaching here, at, YES. That even includes our property and our money. We have to think of it as a pikadon that God has given us. It's something that God has given us while we're in this world to do what God wants with it. Not to say we shouldn't enjoy the financial success that we have, but we also have responsibilities that come along with that, and that's because God is it's really God's money, it's God's property, it's God's world. So our job with
Rabbi Rubenstein said one Rosh Hashanah, Hashem pakad et Sarah, even our children are God's, they are given to us to guard over.
So you're saying they're giving us, we're right. It's our job to guard over them, right? They're God's children. But very good. I love that. It's a great message for Rabbi Rubenstein, Zichrono Livracha. Yeah, this is exactly this idea. Very good. And I saw your question, Alan, that you sent me privately about the Segol. I'm happy to come back to that at the end. I purposely skipped those two words. Okay. The Radak continues and says here, V'hu asahu, what does it mean that God made it? God made the sea, made all these, he made it. What did he do with the water? Go back to the Bereshit story. Yikavu hamayim, right? The water gathered in certain places that allowed the dry land to emerge. And he formed the dry land so that there could be life on it and there could be vegetation, plants. Since God made everything come up and go down, he could do all these things. He moved everything around. It is certainly within God's ability and God's hands to raise things, to lower things. Here he comes back to the Mashiach piece, right? More figuratively here, God can pull us up, God can drag us down, however he would like. And he's given us in exile. That was a valley, that was a low. God pulled us down low, right? The way he could form anything, he could form the sea, he could form the earth, he could form our experience as human beings and as Jews particularly, and that the exile experience was a very low point and is maybe, one could argue, a very low point. I don't know I think that there have been lower points. And then compared to now, I think we're in a relatively good place, though you always have to be wary. V'ata, and now he's saying Romamonu. What does Romamonu mean? What does Romamonu mean? Anybody? What does Romamonu?
He raises us up.
He raises us up. Yeah, Alan. Yeah, he raises us up because we're talking about Mashiach now. If you view this paragraph, this of Lechu and Neranena, as speaking about messianic times, so he's raised us up. He has raised us up to this juncture where we now see a better day. Good, yeah. So I wanted to just make a note here from Amos Chacham. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Okay. No, we're good here. Okay. There wasn't anything I wanted to mention here. Okay. Fine. Let's go back to our source sheet. Let's go on to the next pasuk. Oh, sorry. I want to do one thing before we do that. I wanted to turn to all of you. If Kabbalat Shabbat is supposed to be about bringing in Shabbat out in the fields, and we are supposed to be having this almost like this moment of meditation out in the world, why do you think this would be, so far from what we've read, why would you think this is actually a paragraph that Moshe Cordovero, who was the Kabbalist who instituted this paragraph of Lechu and Neranena before the other paragraphs that join later on, why so far would you think this is the perfect paragraph to have this Kabbalat Shabbat experience? Any thoughts? My water break time now. Yeah, Carol, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, well, for one thing, it's because he's saying, "Come, let us sing." I mean, he says that. So, come, let us bow. It's like an invitation to come out and greet, and raise the shout for Hashem, and also the emphasis on creation. I mean, Shabbos is the,
Right. Yom HaShishi.
Yeah, very good, Carol. What did you say, Alan?
Yom HaShishi v'yichol Hashemayim va'aretz. So,
okay, good. So we have this idea. So there are two things going on here. Yeah, we have this idea that, first of all, we're singing out. That was very much the idea of Rabbi Hanina. Let's go out and greet the Shabbat queen and make it. It's boi kala, boi kala. Wedding is not quiet. The wedding is a loud affair. We sing at a wedding. Everybody is singing at a wedding. So no surprise. Lechu Neranena. But it goes even further than just simply the singing part. And as Alan is mentioning, God finished the heavens and the earth, and here we're actually describing God as the maker of all things in the world, which of course does fit the entering into Shabbat theme. But think about the places that are being described here. God is what is being described here is the outside world. It's like, we're describing the mountains, the top of the mountains, that we're talking about the depths of the earth. We're talking about places of go outside, right? Not just singing, but we're describing, as we talk about the greatness of God, we're talking about the outside world. This idea of go out there and see God out there in the world. See God in the depths of the earth and God at the peaks of the mountain. And what would Rabbi I'm blanking on the name now. Hanina, was it Rabbi Hanina? I'm forgetting who was the rabbi in Masechet Shabbat. He went out to the fields,
yes,
out there amongst God's creations. That's where he greeted Shabbat as it's coming in, and that extra sense of spirituality, that neshama yetera aspect that is supposed to come along with Shabbat. So there's a lot here, I think, in the imagery that's being described in Tehillim that is resonating with those who want to bring in Shabbat with this singing and this acknowledgement of God, God's presence ever so present, out there in the fields and out there in the world that he has created. Okay. Any other thoughts, comments before we move on? Okay. So let me get the screen back to the source sheet. Here we go. Now, and this time we'll use a highlight. I will use my laser pointer. So let's go over to the next pasuk. Pasuk Vav. Bo. Now, you'll tell me again why this fits very much with Kabbalat Shabbat and the imagery. Bo nishtachaveh v'nichra'a nivracha lifnei Hashem Eloseinu. Come, let us bow, like prostrate ourselves on the ground and kneel, and we'll bend our knee before God, who is our maker. Now, go ahead.
It's like the Chadodi when you say boi kala, boi kala.
In what sense, Adam? Spell it out a little bit more.
No, because boi kala, you go at the end you bow down, so I guess it's like similar like that, and also in Aleinu, in Yom Kippur, the same thing.
Good. So Adam's picking up here. What do we do at the end of when we actually finish the Kabbalat Shabbat, the part before Shabbat, before we really formally enter Shabbat? We bow, to the presence that is coming in, right? To the Shabbat queen, which I think is again that extra sense of spirituality of God, being God is always present, but that extra feeling of like, you can really sense it, that extra neshama that you're welcoming that in. We bow. Right? We actually see that in the way we conduct ourselves in Kabbalat Shabbat. We bow. Come, let us bow and kneel and bend before God, our Maker. Now,
Rabbi, doesn't it strike you that he has that the psalmist has the order reversed?
Good.
It should be
the
Recha first, and then the Kriya, and then the Mishtacham there.
So good. Amos Chacham asks this very question. He was bothered by this. It's out of order, as Bob is pointing out. Usually the order would be you would, and I'll just even read from his commentary. Usually, the way the order it would be,
Physically.
sorry, I lost my spot here.
One bends the knee, one
Yeah, you would
kneels, and
bend-
then one bows all the way down.
Exactly. You would bend your knee, then get on your knees, meaning you go backwards. Nivracha, bend your knees. Nichra'a, kneel. Nishtachava, this is backwards. Here you're prostrating first, then you are kneeling, and then you're kind of bending the knee before God. This is out of order. So Amos Chacham suggests that the reason it's out of order, he says, Lafisha b'derech klal, misha omedu ba lishtachavot over ma'amida likriya umikriya lishtachavaya. You go from standing to bending, from bending to prostrating. And he says, kan hiktim hishtachavaya lichriya. Here the bowing all the way comes first, which seems out of order. Shederech habaim el hamikdash, because why? Remember, Amos Chacham was taking the path here of, this is somebody who's coming to the Beit HaMikdash in great joy and excitement. And what's happening here? They're coming to the Mikdash, the Beit HaMikdash, shetchila mishtachavim v'noflim al pneihem. They are almost overwhelmed and overcome by this moment and this experience of coming before God, that they just basically fall straight onto their face. V'achar kach zokfim et gufam, and then they start to straighten up. Umerimim et peneihem me'akarka, and they pick up their face on the ground. Vishokehem, and their thighs, so they're on their knees now. Vishokehem adayim unachot al gabi akarka, and as they're coming up, their thighs are still on the ground, and then they kind of pick themselves up more to be able to do what's in the next pasuk, or in the next phrase, which is nivracha. So he sees here, Amos Chacham sees two things here. Nivracha, undoubtedly on a pshat level, probably means to bend the knee, but he also says there could be there's this hint at the idea of a blessing. When the person is kneeling, they bowed, they came before God, and they were overwhelmed by the experience. They just fall to the floor before God. And then once they can collect themselves a little bit, and they're sort of more on their knees now they're going to say Nivarech et Hashem. Right now they're going to say blessings to God and praises to God, and that's maybe hinted to a little bit in the language of Nivracha. So again, this makes sense. Also, it says Nivracha lifnei Hashem. Where are you doing this bowing and maybe this praising of God? Lifnei Hashem, because you're coming to the Beit HaMikdash, and this is your moment of arrival. Right? Before they were singing because they were on their way, and they're passing through the mountains and this and that. They see the beautiful world of God, and now they're there, and God's presence is there, and He made me. So that's one way to take this pasuk. Now, what does the Radak say here? Take a look. This is source number 16. Bo'u. And by the way, the word bo'u again is a language of command, like lechu. Lechu was come, let's sing. Here's bo'u nishtachaveh. Come, let's do this. Again, when you're talking about Kabbalat Shabbat, come, let's go out to the field. Come, it's this let's go. It's this let's go attitude. Okay. So anyways, the Radak says yomeru ish le'achiv bo'u nishtachaveh. Ki chayavim anu lehodot lo v'lichroa lefanav b'chol minei kriyot. What would be happening here? A person would be saying to his literally achiv is to his brother, to his family member, to his fellow Jew. Come, let us bow, because we are obligated to give thanks to Him. Why? Because again, the Radak is working in a world of Mashiach has arrived, and therefore we have to bow down before God and give thanks. Sorry for that noise. Sorry, I'm just going to turn that off. The lichroa lefanav, and we have to bend before Him. B'chol minei kriyot, and all the different types of forms of bending and bowing to God to show the awe that we have of God in this moment and the thanks that we have of God in this moment that Mashiach has arrived. Nishtachaveh, he writes over here in the next comment, Nishtachaveh, hu shetuach kol guf ba'aretz b'pishut armagayim. This is, as we mentioned, fully prostrated, all the way on the ground. It is completely, we talked about this when we talked about Aleinu, folks, a few weeks back. When you're all the way on the ground, you are basically saying that I'm nothing compared to you. And that's what we're doing right now. In this moment of Mashiach having come, that's how the psalmist sees this, as I'm like nothing compared to you.
Oh, right, poor Jesus.
Yes. Oh, somebody have a comment or question? Oh, no, sorry. Okay, sorry. V'nichra'a, kriyat harosh in k'tzat haguf, he writes here, k'moshe anu kor mebrachot. What is nichra'a? He says that's like you're bending your head. His approach is you're bending your head, not your knees, and with a little bit of your body. The way we bow when we say brachot, like in Shemona Esrei, we bow. We don't bow all the way down. We bend our head and a little bit of our body over. Okay, so you're bending and bowing in all sorts of different ways and showing thanks in every way that you possibly can. Right? That's nichra'a. Okay, that is kriya. And nivracha, he kriyat habirkayim ba'aretz. That's when your knees are on the ground. Again, different ways of doing this. Lifnei Hashem Elokeinu migodleinu umeromemenu kihu shoftenu. Right? Migodleinu umeromenu. So what has he done in our greatness and now in our exalting? He is sort of kihu shoftenu. He is our judge. He has exalted us in this moment, and that's all the more reason. There's no reason every single day we should be thanking God, right? But at that moment, it's so evident and clear that Hashem is Oseinu. He is our maker, and He has brought us to this wonderful day. Any thoughts, questions about that pasuk before we move on? Oh, I see somebody wrote in the chat box. Let me just see here. Is it Yom Kippur, when we say Aleinu, we bow down to the floor? I guess you can compare. Yeah, Adam just wrote me a note here. Yes, correct. Yeah, very good. I like what you wrote, Adam. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, Adam was saying that in Aleinu and the high holidays, when we bow down all the way to the floor, that's when Hashem is really close to us. Right? So we're just like totally on the floor. It's a little bit like that Beit HaMikdash experience that perhaps we're describing here. And Shabbat is like we're greeting the Shabbat queen, and perhaps there's also something to be bending for. Maybe I don't know if all the way to the ground, but yes, there's something extra of sort of God's presence is just that much more felt, I guess, by those who are welcoming Shabbat in.
Rabbi, the psalmist, Radak goes from Osanu, he goes to Shoftenu. And that's something of I'm not necessarily seeing that as a direct extension of what the psalmist is saying.
Yeah, it's interesting that the Radak chooses that word. I assume when he says Shoftenu, our judge, he's talking about here being judged favorably, and that now Mashiach has come. God has sort of judged for us in our favor. I assume that that's what's happening here. But you're right. It's an interesting choice of words by Rav David Kimchi. Okay. Let's look at the next pasuk. So we're up to pasuk Zayin, verse 7, and here in verse 7, there is definitely a shift in tone in the middle of the pasuk. In fact, Amos Chacham, when he's sort of breaking up the different parts of this paragraph of Psalms, he actually says that after the etnachta, which is right here, meaning at the break in the pasuk, that's really like the start of a new section in this paragraph, in this psalm. So let's read it. We'll read it halfway through, and then we'll pause there and see why it's a transition. Ki hu Elokeinu v'anachnu am mar'ito v'tzon yado. Okay, the first half of the verse means that for he is our God, and we are his flock, and the sheep, in his hand. So that really describes the relationship between ourselves as a people and God. And the reason, and it's the key word here also is key. It's a continuation of the previous thought. Why are we bending and bowing and falling on our face and our knees and whatever? because now we're understanding this command. It's because God is our God, and He is, Kel Gadol, as we referred to before. He is that the great God. And here we see again, Ki Hu Elokeinu. He is our God. And the Amos Chacham writes here, I'm just going to read this and translate. He writes that this is said, Lirmos she'af al pi shehu kel gadol al kol ha'olam kulo. Even though God is the great God over the entire world, Hare beyichud hu Elokeinu. Here the focus is that He is our God, right? There is this amazing God out there who is the only God, and He is our God, right? He is, the God that the Jewish people as a nation acknowledge as being the only deity. And that's a special relationship that we have with God. And then he says that this idea of the imagery of the God is the shepherd and we are the flock, that human higotanu umisapek et tzrachenu kiroet sono. God takes care of our needs like a shepherd takes care of the needs of his flock. This is he cites other examples in Tanakh. This is an image that maybe we're most aware of actually on the high holidays, of being God is the shepherd. If you think about the paragraph of Ki anu amecha that we always sing, I think 5 times throughout the Yom Kippur, Ki anu amecha. So one of those phrases in the stanza is that anu tzonecha v'ata ro'enu. Thank you. Right? This idea of God as the shepherd and we are the flock. God really is the one who takes care of our needs. In the same way, the sheep really can't take care of itself. A sheep that's lost doesn't have much hope. But the sheep who's a part of the flock and the shepherd has a responsible shepherd, life is okay for that sheep. Life's pretty good for that sheep, certainly compared to the one who's lost. And I think that's what he says here, that this idea, Amos Chacham says, we are shepherded along under God's watchful eyes, under his guard. So that's the first part here of this pasuk, the way that Amos Chacham reads it. Let's take a look at the Radak here. This is source number 18 on the sheet. The Radak writes here, "Anachnu am marito," that we are, a nation, basically that are his flock. Shira otanu ad. I'm not even sure what this word is actually. Now maybe I read it wrong earlier. Halom. Sorry, I don't know what that word is, but he's basically he is, Shira otanu. He is shepherding us. Ad halom. I'm not sure what halom is. Anyone know what halom is?
Give me a second.
You're looking it up. Okay, fine. We'll keep going. I'm not sure what that word is. I thought I had looked it up earlier, and maybe it slipped me to look it up.
Morphic says hither.
And he's led us to this place. Okay, fine.
Flowery. Right.
So he's led us to this place. Okay, fine. So to this place, meaning the time of Mashiach. And the Radak is taking a messianic approach. God has led us like the flock to the promised land here of Mashiach. Vitzon yado, shenacha otana b'shevet amunato. He, made it sort of resting us under his, b'shevet, under his staff of his faith. And so basically, we've come to the place where we completely trust in God, that we know that that's our place that we can look to. God is who we can look to instill our faith. Okay, now what we're going to see is a shift. So we had this part, we are this imagery of the flock, and again, I'll also point out, where do the sheep roam? Where would you find sheep? Oftentimes, think about Kabbalat Shabbat again. I can't help but notice it, as now we're reading this very slowly.
Out in the fields.
Out in the fields, right? That's where the shepherds go to let their flock roam. And here we are, we're talking about Kabbalat Shabbat. I think it becomes more and more clear why this was a natural choice of somebody who wanted to go out in the fields and experience the world and have this extremely spiritual moment, whatever that means, that here we are. We're like the flock out there with our shepherd in the field. Okay. I see someone wrote in the chat box. Let me see here. Also it reminds me of Neranena Tokef.
Yeah.
Right, Chani. Yeah, this is Neranena Tokef. Correct. We pass under the we are like the sheep who pass under his rod. Yes, and
Ma'avir tzono tachat shifto.
Ma'avir tzono tachat shifto. Yes, we're passing under his rod, and so yes, there is that imagery of God is in control of us as the flock. Okay. Other questions or comments before we go back to the sheet?
David, he was a shepherd. He used to be a shepherd, so maybe he wrote it because of his experience.
Okay, so Adam is pointing out very well that David HaMelech, who again we understand is responsible for Tehillim, though again as I mentioned before, the Gemara does say that there are others who authored certain parts of Tehillim. That David HaMelech was a shepherd. So this may have also been an image that was very relatable for David HaMelech, as perhaps he had some a hand in this paragraph. Okay, let's go back here to the sheet. So now we're going to see a transition to a very different. The rest of the paragraph is going to have a very different feel. We went from this beautiful praise and our relationship between God and seeing God in the world to now the second part of this, the second half of this psalm is this going to be tochacha likahal ovdei Hashem. This is going to be rebuke to the congregation, to the community of those who serve God, and it starts by really talking about listening to God. Okay, listening to God. And here's this Hayom im bikolo tishma'u, which means, sorry, I just got my laser pointer. If you listen to his voice, to his commands, essentially on this day, so then it will be good. Things will go well if you listen. Take a look here at the last comment of the Radak on this pasuk. He writes here, "Shelo tiyu ka'avotehem dor hamidbar." Don't be like your ancestors in the desert, the generation of those who left Egypt. Ki techef shega'ala mibeit avadim, because almost immediately after they are redeemed from the house of bondage, nosu oto b'refidim, they travel and they are tested. God tests them in Refidim, kamo she'asu avotechem b'meriva, just as our ancestors were tested also at Meriva. Now, what's going on here? What happened at Meriva? This is going to be important to understanding the continuation of this paragraph. What happened at Meriva? Anybody know in the Torah? What happened at Meriva?
Isn't that where Moses hit the rock?
Okay, good. That's where Moshe hits the rock. That's how they get water. Right? The place is called Masa Umeriva. So you have there. I'm just looking here at the at Amos Chacham's commentary here. Just looking for one thing that I saw him right earlier today.
What does the Amos Chacham say on Hayom? Because the Tamim they put on there was an Azla Geresh, which is a very powerful Tam, and the translation that we have there is Shvach.
Yeah, so he says
very strong today, Hayom.
So he writes here. He writes, Kalomar, ata la'achar shikinitem. Now, after, I've given you this title of being the shepherd, the flock of God. You're Sonyado, you're the sheep in his hands. Ra'ui lachem lasim libchem lemasha amartem. V'lishmo bekolo, you have now, because you have that special relationship with God, right? Ata. Now you have that. Look at that. You have a special relationship now with God. And even if you take Amos Chacham's approach that now you're sort of standing in front of God in this paragraph in the Beit HaMikdash, look at you. You have this special relationship. You can come this close to God. And he's saying, therefore, you have to place your heart and take heed to what it is that God says. V'lishmoa bekolo, and to listen to him. Katson hashomot bekol ro'an, like the sheep that listens to its shepherd. V'holchot acharav, and follows in the ways of his shepherd. Doesn't stray, the sheep doesn't go on its own path. The sheep follows the shepherd. Now we know sometimes the sheep goes off course, but because we are taken care of so well, like the sheep to their shepherd, so too we should listen to our shepherd, which is obviously God. And that's how he explains this, hayom. And now that we've established our close relationship, you have to listen. It's crucial and critical that we have to listen to God. And now, again, it turns to a very much divrei musar v'tochacha. It turns to really like a rebuke now about how we need to listen. So, and we'll talk now. The next pasuk brings up Meriva very in an explicit way. So, if you remember that the place that's being referred to here at Meriva is when I believe this is the Jewish people are unsure. They're unsure. This is chapter 17 in Sefer Shemot. They're unsure. They are saying in their hearts, Hayesh Hashem bikirbeinu im ayin. This is right, but which means, is God in our midst or is he not? And right after that, there is a war with Amalek. I believe it's Rashi who comments there that when you start asking questions about Hayesh Hashem bikirbeinu im ayin, is God really with us? Then it's no surprise that Amalek will then attack you if you have that kind of doubt about God being present. So this is a moment in the desert when the Jewish people, not that long in the desert, have this moment of doubt about whether or not God is there. And that place is called Masa Umeriva. Okay?
It's wrong. I think that's where Moses actually speaks to the rock.
The first time.
No, it's where he's told to hit the rock.
I think that's
in the beginning. He's told to hit the rock, and the second time in Bamidbar, and I'm looking to see if it's the same, if it's Meriva, and I know it's.
I'll pull it up right here.
He's told to speak, and he hits, and that's why he gets into trouble. But in 17, he's told to hit the rock.
Yeah, that's the first time he's told, and that's the time he is actually told to hit the rock.
That's in Shmo.
Yeah, here I'm pulling it up on the screen so everybody can see. See that Tanakh is at your fingertips these days. You can just go like that. So here, see the nation. They laughed at the wilderness of Sin, and vayachanu b'Refidim. There they are. They're in Refidim. Ve'ein mayim leshtot la'aham. This is the first time they have problems with water. Anyone know how long ago they crossed the sea?
2 days.
Yeah, it was just a few days. It was very, very. It was not. This was not. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, here. They already had problems with not having enough water a few days afterwards. I don't remember if this is exactly that same scene, but nonetheless, here they have problems with no water. So they complain to Moshe. They go to Moshe and they say, "Give us water." God and Moshe says, "Why are you arguing and yelling at me? Why don't you yell at God?" Basically, Matinasuna Tashem, and why are you testing God? So the people were thirsty. They complain again to Moshe, and they say, "Why did you take us out of Egypt?" Which you'll hear many more times after that in the Torah. We're all, dying of thirst. And so Moshe cries out to God, what do I do with these people? They're going to stone me. And God says to Moshe, okay, pass before the people, take, some of the elders with you, take the staff and hit the rock. And then the water will emerge forth. And this is exactly what happens. And so it happens, and the people drink, and everyone saw it. And this place was named Masa Umeriva. This place became named Masa Umeriva. First we called Refidim. Then it becomes named Masa Umeriva. Why? Because the Jewish people quarreled and they tested God, saying, is God present among us or not? Which is why Moshe was trying to get them to direct their complaints to God. He's like, hey, why don't you talk to God? They're like, God only does big plagues. You're the one, Moshe, we have problems with right now. And he's trying to redirect them and say, you're not seeing God here right now, are you? They're struggling. The Jewish people are struggling to see God in the picture. And of course, what happens next is Vayavo Amalek. Amalek attacks the Jewish people at that particular juncture in the story. So what we have here is, this will end. We'll just read this last pasuk. Al takshu livavachem kimuriva. Do not be stubborn as at Meriva, like your ancestors were in the desert when there was no water and they didn't even acknowledge God in part of that conversation. Ki yom masa bamibar is the day that you tested, you guys call masa umeriva. I believe here it's talking about, the idea of really having tested God in the desert. All right, Shem HaMakom, Ki Yom Masa. Shem HaMakom Nikra Masa Umeriva. Or as the day of Masa. That if you remember that story at Masa. Umeriva al Riv Bnei Yisrael al Nasotam et Hashem Lemor Hayesh Hashem B'Kirbeinu Imayim. Is God really here or is he not here? And this is the beginning of the tochacha, the rebuke of this of the Jewish people in this section. Now, this part will be maybe harder to see why it is why this is a natural selection of Kabbalat Shabbat, though I think that we can make heads or tails on it. Sorry, I see Geet wrote in. This is the second time. The first one was told. The first he was told to hit the rock. Here he was supposed to talk to the rock. Did I misread that when I was going through it before?
In Shmot, it's Masa and Meriva, and then in Bamidbar, when Moshe is told to talk and he hits instead, it's just Meriva.
Right. That he's clearly told he hits it, but he was supposed to talk to the rock, and that's just called Meriva. Here it's Masa Meriva. Here he is just simply talking to the. He is supposed to just hit the rock, right? He tells him Matcha Asher Hikita Bo Et Hayor Kach Biadcha VeHalachta, and what happens? He goes to the rock Vikita Vatsur, and the water flows out, and everyone saw. So yeah, here is the place where he hits the rock, and then later on, it's the story where he's not supposed to hit the rock, though he ends up hitting the rock.
Excuse
Both
me.
places there was a big fight, obviously, that broke out before that, where Moshe is dealing with the Jewish people complaining. Okay, so I hope this has been helpful. Again, for me, by the way, maybe I'm being totally selfish, and if I am, I apologize. For me, being able to slow down and understand Kabbalat, even the words of this psalm of Kabbalat that we recited Kabbalat, I think can help us really understand what we're saying and frame why it is that we're saying it. So that's why we're taking it nice and slow and really trying to understand the simple understanding, the pshat in the psukim, and try to think about it from the mindset of those who instituted Kabbalat Shabbat. I went way over time, but I was having way too much fun, I guess.